Yes. If it's there, it has to be operational. Even like the Vent-A-Hood, if it's there, it has to be operational. Make sense?
Absolutely.
So heating source. I know in Texas, we get cold for about a minute a year. You would think that we wouldn't have to have a heating source, but we do. It is required to maintain the home at 50 degrees. And it's gotta be permanently affixed. So you can't have a space heater. Now you can have a radiator, or you can have a permanently affixed heater. It doesn't have to be central heat and air. If it's an air condition, if there's an air conditioner there, I think it should be required here, but it's not. But if the air conditioner is there, it is required to be operational. If you have the thing that says you're supposed to have an air conditioner, the thermostat that says you're supposed to have an air conditioner, the unit must be outside and inside. So if it gets stolen, you gotta replace it.
So it's not a window unit type thing?
You can have a window unit, but that does not make it square footage. So we just had an appraisal done on a house out in Cove. All the agents and the sellers said we enclosed that patio, and we have a window unit in it, so that's square footage. It, in actuality, on a FHA appraisal, is not. And when we got the word back from the appraiser said no, has to be tied into the central heat and air of the house. It can't be a window unit.
Interesting.
So, safe, sound, sanitary, still operational. Boy, we covered it all without me even going to my notes, didn't we? You know, basically what's important on the VA appraisal, is it marketable? Can the house be sold? If it's, not too long ago, we had a house. The seller owned this property. The house was here on 2 acres. They had to go through the seller's land to get to the main road on an easement. Non-recorded easement. We couldn't do a mortgage until they figured that out, and they had to do a maintenance agreement on the road, and that kind of thing. That affects the marketability of the house, because nobody wants to buy a house they can't get to. And what happens, a seller was 85 years old, what happens when that seller passes away and an heir takes over and says, I wanna build a house right here? It has to be, you know, you gotta be able to get to it, that kind of thing. So, encroachments. This is why it's important for people to make sure they're building the fence on their land, that kind of thing. Because you have to resolve that before you can do a VA loan. Any kind of geographical problems with the house. We don't have a lot of these problems because we don't rain like this all the time. But you've got to worry about things like drainage and stuff like that. If the house sits at the bottom of the yard and it forms a nice little bowl for all this rain, and it floods every time we turn around, probably not going to be able to do a VA or an FHA mortgage on that. Even conventional. That affects the safety and the soundness of the house, right? So you got to look at things like that. Not huge in our area. It's really not. We are starting to see a lot more properties that have non-residential usages as well. So they have a house with a big shop, and they run a business out of the shop. There are special rules that go along with that. We have to verify it's not going to affect the residential capability of the house, and that that the house isn't just like a shack compared to this $500,000 shop, right? So the appraiser does look at that too. If somebody is running a business out of their house and they want to sell their house, might need to relocate the business before they really put their house on the market. Convert that shop to a personal use again. See what I'm saying?
Yep.
We're seeing a lot of that with woodworking right now because of the pandemic. That really dates this video now, doesn't it? Yeah. But we're seeing a lot of people running businesses out of their homes and building shops and garages and things like that, building those accessory units to run their business out of. Utilities, it's got to have the ability for utilities. It's got to have those utilities. Whether you're on a sewer, like public sewer, or you're on septic, that kind of thing, they are going to check those things. They're going to make sure they work. They're gonna, and oftentimes, especially if a house has been vacant for a while, the appraisers are gonna call for a septic inspection. Because again, they're not experts in that. So they're gonna make sure that they've got somebody that will check it. So, Emma,
So-
I've covered this, I'm sorry, this is FHA already. But yes, somebody had a question?
Yeah, so on a VA and FHA, we pretty much can't expect a septic inspection required for this transaction.
Sometimes. It's gonna depend on the appraiser. A lot of that's subject to what they can see. I mean, if they flush the toilet and it bubbles or does something funny, they're going to require an inspection.
My recommendation is if you go out there and you find a septic system, recommend to the buyer that they have a septic inspection they pay for. The house that I'll be closing on tomorrow had a septic, zero maintenance in the last 5 years.
Wow.
Bad condition, sprinkler heads, everything.
And the best part about it, that fee for the inspection is negotiable.
Yeah.
Either the
Mhm.
seller or the buyer can pay for it.
But it's important for the buyer side,
Yeah.
because that's an issue. Just recommend that, it's what I
I
find.
totally agree with you. I think any kind of loan, if it's got a septic, you should inspect it. But the appraiser is not subject matter expert on that. And they very often, especially if the house has been vacant for a while, will require a septic inspection.
And the recommendation is do that during the option period, sometime in
Mhm.
through there, because if
Absolutely.
they can't resolve the issue, then you're protecting your buyers.
So VA actually lists some defective conditions that they want to, the appraisers to look for. Construction defects. If they see something that is bad, they are supposed to call it out. So DIYers, somebody tells you they're putting their house on the market and they're gonna DIY the kitchen remodel. You know, things like that, they will call that in a heartbeat. Poor workmanship, continuing settlement, you know, you see a house that's settling, there are certain areas of Central Texas that are known for foundation issues. If they see cracks in the bricks, things like that, they're gonna ask about it. They're going to check it, and they'll probably require a foundation inspection. They have to do head and shoulders inspections of the attic, which means stick their head and shoulders up there. When they do that, and they have to take a picture to prove they did it. When they do that, what they're looking for is damp, mold, debris, bugs, animals. Bless you. Things like that. They are going to look. If they see all the insulation is down, most times they'll kind of go point that out. It's not necessarily a required repair. I've seen pictures where the insulation has fallen down and they don't require it to be repaired. I've also seen pictures where the insulation has fallen down and they require it to be repaired. Kind of appraiser judgment on that. Do you have a question?
No, I'm sorry, I was stretching.
Oh, no, you're fine.
You know, you can circumvent a lot of that stuff for the appraisal, because the appraisal in the system of things happens a little further down the road. What I've learned from experience is when the buyer gets a home inspection, that if you get a really good home inspector, they're gonna identify a lot of things that are gonna be picked up by VA appraisals and also the FHA. So, and the guys that I use, you know, they'll look for that. So what I try and do is remediate those issues with the seller from the inspection, compare the two.
Absolutely.
It's just food for thought. It's very helpful, because then when you get down to the appraisal time period, really, if you have those things corrected by that time, then one of the only things that may impact it is the market value. And then you only have to deal with the market value at that point in time, not these other outstanding issues.
Well, and consider
Something
this
I've learned
too.
from experience.
If you have a lot of things that are gonna be called on the appraisal, if you have a lot of things on the inspection, does it not diminish the value mentally
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
for your buyer?
Yep. And we're not gonna pay as much.
appraisers are also subjective. Not appraisers, appraisals are subjective. And it's an opinion. You can send 3 appraisers out to a property and you'll end up with 3, maybe 4 different values. It's an opinion. It's based on fact, but when they look at the condition of the property and they see that it's not been maintained well, what's the first thing you do? Well, if I can see on the surface it's not been maintained, then below the surface it's not been maintained either, and I'm gonna look a little harder. That's human nature. So, absolutely, a pre-listing inspection is a phenomenal idea to help ward that off. On the flip side of that, you know, the buyer's inspection is another phenomenal idea to help ward that off. So, absolutely. They're also looking, appraisers are looking for decay, like rotting wood, things like that. They're looking for termites. In our area, termites are a real concern, right? So they're looking for wood destroying insects, let's say it that way. Because we've got carpenter ants and other things like that too. They're looking for the mechanical systems, we've talked about that, to make sure the heat's working 50 degrees. That's what the threshold is. Has to be able to maintain it 50 degrees. Do you know why that's important? Prevents busted pipes too. Because if the pipes bust, what does that mean? We have a massive issue, right? That can lead to busting out concrete and tearing down walls and things like that. So those are all important. The roof, most appraisers are looking for a 2 to 3 year lifespan left. However, if they're missing shingles, cupped shingles, curled shingles, they're going to call for those to be inspected or repaired. When you get the roof inspection or the appraiser recommends the roof to be repaired, that's not a deal killer necessarily. If you can get a roof inspector out there to say, oh yeah, no, what you can see from the street, because they're not gonna get up on the roof. What you can see from the street is this section had some damage and needs to be repaired. That will satisfy the appraiser most times, as long as we can get a certified roofer to say that. I know the pitfalls there. That's not in my appraisal class.
Right.
So, I mean, those are important. They're gonna make sure crawl spaces have to be accessible. So if it's a pier and beam house and there's crawl spaces under it, those crawl spaces have to be accessible to the appraiser. They have to be in working condition. Again, we're back to that operational word, right? Basements, that kind of things. Pools. We all know that adding a $50,000 pool doesn't add $50,000 to your value, right? I've talked to a ton of appraisers. They have said that depending on the price range, it can actually reduce the value of the house. Because lower price ranges, the maintenance cost is high. So, pool doesn't necessarily increase the value of a home, especially if you can't find comps for it. I remember in Colleen on it's in that little pocket neighborhood off Chance. There's a house over there, Steamboat Springs, house over there that has an in-ground pool. And the appraiser actually deducted $10,000 from the value because of the pool. One, there wasn't a single comp to be had in that neighborhood with a pool. 2, it increased the maintenance factor a lot. 3, it left absolutely no yard in that house. I mean, you basically walked out your back patio and stepped into the pool. There was just no yard left. So that's a big one that they do look at. Now, as far as like, do they have any standards on it? It has to be operational. So if it's a big hole in the ground with no water in it, that's not operational. They will oftentimes require it to be looked at and fixed. It has to meet code, whatever the local code is. There's no code in the VA handbook for a pool, but it has to meet the local code. So it's got to be, it's safety and security.